I knew I was screwed the second I saw the envelope. Not because of what it was, but because of how it arrived, slid across the conference table like some twisted wedding invitation, delivered with a smirk that reeked of Axe body spray and nepotism. Trevor didn't say a word, just leaned back in his ergonomic throne, laced his fingers behind his gelled-up head, nodded toward the cream envelope like he'd just handed me a retirement gift, and not a middle finger dipped in corporate toner. Inside was a memo of appreciation, unsigned, unsealed, and completely devoid of human warmth. For 12 years of loyal service, it read, as if those years had been a long weekend at a beach house instead of a grinding, 60-hour-a-week exercise in duct taping operational chaos into a Fortune 500 fantasy. No letterhead, no signature, no mention of my actual title, just some canned HR text copied from a 2007 LinkedIn post. I thought you deserved a formal goodbye, Trevor said, oozing smugness. Nothing's official, of course. We're just pivoting supplier strategy. You'll stay on payroll, of course. Translation, you're still employed but dead to us. I looked around the table. The CFO pretended to read his watch. General counsel tapped her stylus like it was a gavel counting down to my silence. No one would meet my eyes, not even my so-called mentee from procurement who used to cry in my office during Q4 audits. I wasn't being fired. I was being erased. Now, before I go on, if you're already halfway through this thinking, wait, whoa, what happens next? Do us both a favor and hit the subscribe button and tap like. I promise it gets juicy. And frankly, keeps this petty little storytelling engine running. Back to the memo, I smiled. That tight-lipped, HR-compliant smile women in leadership develop after years of being told they're too assertive while cleaning up everyone else's fires. I folded the memo in half, then into quarters, then into something just barely big enough to slide into my purse without vomiting. Anything else? I asked. Trevor tilted his head. You'll no longer need supplier access. Just focus on internal ops for now. We'll keep you looped in where appropriate. Which in Trevor speak meant, I've blocked you from the vendor portal, reassigned your projects to Kyle the intern, and told the board you're transitioning to a strategic role, which means nothing and leads nowhere. Understood, I said. 2 syllables. Calm. Measured. The same way I'd once said, reboot the server, while internal systems melted during Black Friday. I walked out of that room with my dignity zipped tight in my tote bag next to an expired Luna bar and a post-it I'd scribbled 12 years ago that said, fix everything. Again, that was the day I became a ghost in my own company. The whispers started almost immediately. A vendor rep I'd known for a decade texted, hey, weird Q, did we get a new point of contact? Just got a pricing update from someone named T. Halberd, Trevor, of course, was already trying to renegotiate contracts he hadn't read, let alone understood. The kind of agreements that had been carefully structured over years of trust, relationship building, and the occasional midnight phone call to a warehouse manager crying about a missed shipment in Tulsa. I stayed quiet, for now, but I wasn't done. Not by a long shot, because Trevor didn't know something. He didn't know that the contract he was screwing with, the one tied to our biggest supplier, had my fingerprints all over it. And I didn't bury the clause that would end his little empire out of spite. I buried it because I knew someone like him would eventually show up. They didn't even clear out my office. Just reassigned it to overflow hot desking and dumped a sad ficus in the corner like that would absorb the humiliation. My name stayed on the door for a week, taped over with a sticky note that said Trevor's Ops Squad light bulb. Every time I passed by, I could smell the desperation in that emoji. I wasn't fired. That would have required backbone. I was archived. Still on payroll, still logging in, still technically director of ops, but with no vendor access, no calendar invites, and no updates from the team I built from the ground up. HR called it transitioning to a lateral strategic role. I called it being ghosted with direct deposit. My replacement was a guy named Dylan. He had a master's degree in supply chain management and the emotional intelligence of a traffic cone. First week on the job, he confused 2 warehouse hubs and sent 10,000 units of medical-grade adhesives to an agricultural supplier in Idaho. I found out when a frantic warehouse supervisor texted me a photo of shrink-wrapped pallets labeled Surgibond next to a tractor tire display. Hey, just checking, the message read. Are we expanding into veterinary surgery? Trevor's response. A Slack update with a rocket emoji and the words, beta testing new cross-sector distribution verticals. Stay agile. Rocket, it would have been funny if it wasn't so gross. Vendor after vendor started pinging me directly, quiet calls, side emails, even one who sent a voicemail that just said, hey, so is this a prank? One of our oldest contacts, a guy named Mike from VersaFleet, actually drove to our office, walked right into reception and asked to speak to me. They told him I was out indefinitely. He called me that night, voice low, like we were conspiring. Carolyn, serious question. Is Trevor even authorized to renegotiate rates? We had a 3-year lock. He's trying to amend it via DocuSign with no countersign. My laugh came out like static. He sent a DocuSign? Yeah. Said he's modernizing the vendor lifecycle. That was Trevor's new buzzword, modernizing. Anytime something broke, it was because the old system lacked flexibility. When suppliers pushed back, he'd post on LinkedIn about disrupting outdated relationship paradigms. When Dylan fumbled logistics, Trevor posted a blurry photo of a conference room with the caption, "Hard pivots right arrow smart wins. Can't wait to share what's next." Meanwhile, ops was imploding in slow motion. Inventory went missing. SLA violations spiked. Our on-time delivery rate fell below 70%, and customer complaints started sounding like legal threats. The COO asked in a leadership call if ops had hit turbulence. Trevor replied, "Nothing major, just recalibrating legacy scaffolding." Legacy scaffolding. That's what I was now. A rusty old bridge, conveniently forgotten, until the whole damn thing collapses into the river and suddenly everybody remembers who built it. And through all of this, I stayed quiet. I sat in meetings with my mic muted, camera off, name misspelled in the attendees list. No one asked for my input. No one noticed when I started forwarding key documents to my personal drive. I wasn't planning revenge, not yet, I was just watching. Logging. Letting Trevor dig with both hands, because here's the thing about ghosts, we don't haunt the living, we haunt the guilty. And Trevor was about to start hearing footsteps. The call came in at 8:13 p.m., Rochester area code. I was sitting on the floor of my apartment surrounded by unopened mail and half a glass of grocery store Pinot, trying to convince myself that reheating soup counted as self-care. I almost let it ring out, thinking it was another vendor rep or, God help me, Trevor trying to circle back on legacy knowledge. But something in my gut said, answer. Carolyn, it's Martin Lowell. I sat up straighter like my spine had been wired to a forgotten respect switch. Martin had been a VP at Stratford Components back in the day, our biggest supplier before they got acquired, restructured, and renamed something algorithmic and meaningless. I hadn't heard from him in years. Last time we talked, he was praising a cost optimization model I'd built on a flight to Denver after a vendor conference catered by limp salad and existential dread. Martin, been a while. Didn't waste time. I've been watching what that kid's doing to your ops stack. And I gotta ask, has he completely lost it or is this performance art? I laughed for real. Depends on whether the board claps at the end. He sighed like a man who once cared, then learned better. You know, he tried to void our 3-year lock agreement, sent some nonsense amendment, and claimed it was phase 1 of dynamic forecasting alignment. I pinched the bridge of my nose. He's allergic to contracts. Thinks they're suggestions with fonts. Martin continued. I was tempted to reply with a cease and desist in Comic Sans. Please do, I'll frame it. He chuckled, but there was steel under it. Look, I'm not calling just to vent. I remember when we built that original contract. You were the one who insisted on embedding that clause, what was it? Section 12.3.1, change of control activation, I said, words tasting like cold metal. If a majority stake in the supplier changes hands, the client has to renegotiate. All terms suspended. That's the one, he said, voice suddenly sharper. You wrote that clause because I didn't trust the execs you were about to merge with. Turns out I was thinking ahead. Turns out you were thinking beyond even that. There was a pause. Then, deliberate, Carolyn, you ever thought about taking a seat on the other side? What do you mean, I mean? I left Stratford 2 years ago, rolled over my shares into the holding company. I sit on the board now, small seat, quiet seat, but I've got voting power. And some dry powder I've been meaning to put to use. I went still. My old laptop buzzed behind me, stuck mid-update, fan wheezing like a dying ferret. Martin kept talking. I've been acquiring more stake lately. Nothing flashy. And I've got a partner, someone interested in consolidation. The way things are trending, there's an opportunity to shift majority. Silent control, not flashy, but potent. I knew where this was going, I just didn't believe it. He continued, you put the clause there, you know how to pull the thread. And I'm tired of watching your work get dismantled by a man-child with a Bluetooth fidget cube. I snorted. You saw the cube? I saw the TikTok post. Workflow Wednesdays with tea. I threw my phone across the room. He sat in the silence that follows unspoken decisions. I'm not saying revenge, Martin added, softer now. I'm saying leverage. You built the backbone of that company. Maybe it's time to stop being a backbone, be the brain instead. I stared at the memo still tacked to my fridge with a novelty magnet that said wine is my spirit animal. 12 years of duct tape and grace. 12 years of calming warehouse fires and smoothing vendor nerves with 3 cups of coffee and a spreadsheet. I thought of Trevor's smirk, the blank memo, the unspoken erasure. And for the first time since this all started, I didn't feel angry. I felt aligned. Tell me more, I said. The dinner was held at that overpriced faux industrial place downtown, the kind with exposed ductwork and artisanal ice cubes the size of toddler fists. Everything on the menu came deconstructed, including the chairs, which might as well have been made from bent paperclips. I was seated at the far end of the table, next to an untouched centerpiece, and across from the company's outsourced PR rep, who spent 20 minutes describing her podcast about mindful disruption. Trevor took the stage, or rather, the riser in front of the bar, wearing a sport coat that probably cost more than my first car. He tapped his glass with a spoon like he was about to propose marriage to his own ego. Thanks, everyone, he began, voice oozing with that brand of faux humility, unique to men who have never faced consequences. Tonight, I'm thrilled to walk you through our next evolution. a bold leap into the future of scalable vendor optimization. Translation: watch me gut ops with a smile. Behind him, a screen lit up with a deck so polished it practically blinded the waiter. Slides flashed past with buzzwords like frictionless procurement, AI-enabled handoffs, dynamic redundancy elimination, which, in human language, meant we're cutting 40% of supplier coordination and praying the rest doesn't explode. Trevor grinned like he'd invented efficiency. By reducing legacy friction points, Carolyn's old term, by the way, we estimate a 26% increase in savings across the fulfillment stack by Q3. This is what modernization looks like. He gestured to a slide showing a graphic of a rocket launching out of a supply chain diagram. It looked like something a teenager made in Canva after 2 Red Bulls. The board clapped politely, not loud, not convinced, just enough to preserve the illusion that someone besides Trevor believed in this carnival ride. I said nothing. I sipped my water, chewed a roll, watched, noticed the cracks in his delivery, a little tremor when one director leaned forward with a question about redundancy mapping, and Trevor changed the subject like he was redirecting a toddler from a hot stove. I waited, let him bask, let him believe. Near the end, he dropped the phrase that made my stomach curl, and as we sunset legacy contracts, we'll empower suppliers to match our new benchmarks or find alternate solutions. Sunset legacy contracts. That was his term for bulldozing the agreements I'd spent a decade structuring to hold this rickety kingdom together. I could feel the old rage rise, but I pushed it down. Rage is loud. Control is quieter. When the lights came up and Trevor took his little bow, I glanced across the room. One of the board members, Eileen Markham, VP of Strategic Risk, the same woman who once referred to me as ops wallpaper during an offsite, was looking at me. Not scornfully, not dismissively. She nodded just once. Subtle, deliberate, and then looked away. It was the smallest crack in a sealed vault, but it was enough. A silent acknowledgement that someone at that table remembered what I used to be. Maybe even suspected what I still was. I left before dessert, walked home in heels that hadn't seen sunlight since pre-COVID. My inbox pinged halfway through the crosswalk. Martin. Subject line: next steps. I didn't open it, not yet. Instead, I stood on the curb, looking back at the restaurant, where Trevor was probably explaining how AI would revolutionize napkin folding. And I smiled, because that little rocket on his slide, it was about to crash into a clause he'd never seen. Written in font size 8, buried like a landmine, planted by the same ops wallpaper he'd just tried to paint over. The document was 18 pages long, written in that sterile corporate dialect that makes your brain want to fold itself into an origami swan and fly out the window. But I read every damn word, twice. Then I printed it, bound it with one of those cheap plastic spines, and laid it on my kitchen table like a sacred text. This wasn't a resignation letter or a revenge manifesto. It was an ownership declaration, quiet, surgical, and devastating in its simplicity. Martin had moved fast, faster than I thought someone of his age and orthopedic sneaker collection could manage. Over the span of 3 weeks, he'd acquired just enough voting shares, personally and through a quiet coalition of silent partners, to secure controlling interest in the holding company that owned our biggest supplier. The supplier Trevor had tried to bully. The one whose contracts I used to draft in the middle of the night, caffeine-buzzed and spreadsheet-weary. And now, I was co-director. No press release, no celebratory champagne. Just 2 notarized forms, a new email signature, and a quiet update to the Secretary of State's database that would trigger a cascade Trevor wouldn't see coming until it snapped his spine clean in two. Martin had made the final filing from his home office in upstate New York, sending me a photo afterward of the confirmation screen on his desktop. The timestamp read 9:03 a.m. I didn't smile. Not exactly. But I did exhale, and that was enough. Later that night, I pulled up the old master contract from my external drive. The one I wrote 8 years ago, back when Trevor was still trying to figure out how to print double-sided PDFs. Clause 14.7c. In the event of a majority ownership transfer of the supplier or its parent entity, all existing contractual obligations between supplier and client shall be suspended pending full renegotiation of terms under the new ownership. Failure to comply within 21 calendar days grants the supplier the right to pause fulfillment and slash or terminate without penalty. I highlighted that last part. Read it again. Then again. All existing contractual obligations suspended. It wasn't written in red ink. It didn't shout. It just sat there quietly, like a viper curled under the conference table, waiting for the wrong footstep. I remembered the night I wrote that clause. I'd argued with legal for 2 hours about its wording. They said it was too aggressive. I said it was necessary. You don't plan for good faith successors, I told them. You plan for opportunistic ones. And Trevor? He was the opportunist's opportunist, slick, smug, and stupid in all the ways that count. I printed a copy of the clause and slid it into a new folder, labeled it with 3 words, control, clause, triggered. Then I slipped it into my tote next to a notebook full of vendor contact names, a flash drive, and an unopened protein bar I'd stolen from the boardroom snack cart 2 weeks ago. I hadn't eaten it, just like knowing it was there. Martin texted me the next morning, sent pre-notification to fulfillment heads. First wave of paused orders hits next week. Ready? I typed always. I didn't need a war room. I didn't need fanfare. What I needed was to sit back, sip my coffee, and wait, because the shipments were about to stop. And Trevor, he was about to learn what happens when you try to streamline the one person who actually understood the stream. Let the silence begin. It started with one letter, just one. Delivered by courier, real paper, real envelope, real ink like it was 1996 and someone wanted to make a point. Addressed to the VP of Logistics, CC'd to the CFO and COO. A formal notice of fulfillment pause, citing ownership change protocols per clause 14.7 C of the binding supplier contract. Inside, legalese so dry it could sand wood. But the message was a gut punch in Helvetica. All shipments temporarily paused pending renegotiation under new ownership. 3 days later, the second letter landed. Then a third. Then the phone started ringing like someone had pulled the fire alarm inside a hornet's nest. Every department with an acronym had a meltdown. App, R, CA, even HR got looped in when someone filed a hostile compliance report out of pure panic. The CFO lost his mind first. I wasn't there to see it in person, of course. Ghosts don't get meeting invites. But my friend Michelle in procurement forwarded me a thread from the internal Slack war room they'd hastily spun up. CFO Harper, who authorized this new supplier exec? This clause was buried. How did we miss this? COO Riley, are we sure this isn't just a play for pricing renegotiation? Need to identify principal contact. Legal has nothing on this Martin guy. Trevor H., relax, I'll flip it. Some fund probably bought in without knowing the full ops model. I'll talk them down. He said flip it like he was trading Pokemon cards. Like this wasn't a strategic asset freeze launched by someone who'd been standing 10 feet away from him, silent, invisible, and taking notes like a goddamn war historian. By day 5, shipments had stopped to 6 major distribution hubs. Inventory sat idle in climate-controlled warehouses that cost 12 grand a week just to hum. Trucks idled. Clients complained. One of them, Keystone RX, our largest pharma logistics partner, escalated a supply chain disruption review and issued a formal warning. If we didn't resolve the issue within 10 days, they'd invoke their own walkaway clause. Walkaway clause. That's corporate for your bleeding out, and we're not offering gauze. Word spread like mold in a damp basement. Trevor held a hasty all-hands update over Teams, stuttering through a non-explanation about strategic flux and external realignment initiatives. He answered no questions, just smiled, said we're in control, and ended the call 5 minutes early. Back in the boardroom, I imagined the walls sweating. Michelle texted me again. Trevor says the new supplier head is bluffing, wants to handle it solo. He thinks it's some activist equity firm. I wrote back, he's half right. It's not a firm, it's me. But I didn't hit send, not yet. Let him stew. Let him swagger into meetings and mansplain contingency plans to the very people I'd trained to spot garbage when they smelled it. Let him keep thinking this was fixable with a LinkedIn post and a pivot chart. The COO sent an emergency note to legal asking for a sit-down with the supplier's new directors. Martin agreed quietly, calmly, meeting scheduled Thursday 4:00 p.m., conference room B, closed session. No mention of me on the invite list. Perfect. The clock was ticking, and Trevor, for all his bravado, didn't realize he was already living on borrowed time. Every word he spoke from that point forward was a countdown, and I was holding the detonator. Subject line hidden boxes like a church bell at a funeral. Emergency board session Thursday 4 p.m. confidential. No agenda, no context. Just a time, a room, and a rapidly decaying sense of control radiating from the executive wing. I wasn't invited, of course. I was never going to be invited. Carolyn from Ops didn't belong in boardrooms anymore, at least not the way Trevor told it. But I didn't need a seat at the table to know the silverware was about to rattle. What made the email interesting wasn't who it excluded, it was who it didn't. Martin Lowell, just that name. No title, no intro, no context. Not VP, not advisor, not consultant. Just Martin dropped onto that invite like a pebble into a pond. But ripples? Oh, there'd be plenty. When Trevor saw the invite, he made the mistake of scoffing out loud. Martin? Seriously. He chuckled in his glass office, loud enough for Michelle to text me about it immediately. He's just a supplier guy. What's he gonna do? Invoice us into submission? He leaned back in his chair, arms behind his head like he was posing for a self-congratulatory portrait. Same smug lean he used when he handed me the unsigned memo like a participation trophy for surviving 12 years under fluorescent lights. But that's the thing about Trevor. Never bothered to learn the difference between supplier and shareholder, between old man with a Rolodex and co-director holding a loaded clause with your name on it. I spent the morning reviewing everything one last time. Martin and I had already walked through our positioning, what we'd say, what we wouldn't, how long we'd let Trevor hang himself with his own confidence. But I had one final file to prepare. Not a contract, not a presentation, just a folder. Inside, updated supplier terms, pricing schedules, service protocols, fulfillment timelines, and a copy of Clause 14.7c, printed on thick paper with the key sentence highlighted in yellow. All prior obligations are suspended until renegotiated. That line glowed like fire in the dark. I slid the folder into my old leather tote, the one with the torn lining and the little coffee stain from a layover in Dallas. I hadn't carried it in months. Felt like arming up again, like stepping back into a skin I hadn't realized I'd missed. I wasn't going to make a scene. That was Trevor's brand, loud entrances and louder failures. I was going to make a moment. One that landed so quietly, no one would hear it coming until it was done. At 3:47 p.m., I stood across the street from the office, watching board members trickle into the building like weathered generals marching toward a war they didn't know had already been lost. One held a Starbucks cup. Another clutched an annotated copy of last quarter's burn rate report. None of them looked up. No one ever looks for ghosts in daylight. At 3:53 p.m., I got the text from Martin. He's smirking. Binders on the table. We're ready? I took a deep breath, pulled the folder from my tote, and walked. Past reception, where the new girl didn't recognize me. Past ops, where Dylan sat with his headphones on, probably mistaking confusion for strategy. Past the wall where my nameplate used to hang. And finally, toward the boardroom door, silent, steady, and 10 minutes early for a meeting I was never supposed to attend. But I wasn't here for permission. I was here for the reckoning. The boardroom was colder than usual. Maybe it was the AC, or maybe it was the way nobody spoke above a whisper as they filed in. The kind of hush that hangs just before a storm, when the sky hasn't cracked yet, but the air already tastes like electricity. Trevor sat near the head of the table, one chair down from his father, like a prince in training. He was wearing that same smug half-smile he used when belittling people just smart enough to notice. Arms folded, jacket crisp, hair too shiny for someone about to get spiritually suplexed. Martin sat directly across from him, calm, no laptop, no phone, just a small, tan folder and the faintest suggestion of a smile that said, "You already lost, you just haven't figured it out yet." The board murmured hellos and tapped their styluses against overpriced notepads. No one knew exactly what this meeting was about. The COO guessed vendor renegotiation. The CFO guessed emergency capital strategy. The head of legal, she didn't guess at all. She brought a binder. When the lawyer walked in, everyone noticed. It wasn't just the size of the thing, 3 inches thick, tabbed and dog-eared like a sacred relic. It was how she handled it, like it was already a verdict. She placed it in front of her seat, took a slow breath, and flipped to a flagged page. Before we proceed, she began, adjusting her glasses. There's a matter of supplier relations that must be clarified. Specifically, the clause that governs continuity of contract under a change of ownership. The room hushed further. Trevor raised an eyebrow like a bored substitute teacher. The lawyer read aloud. Clause 14.7c. In the event of a majority ownership transfer of the supplier or its parent entity, all existing contractual obligations between supplier and client shall be suspended pending full renegotiation of terms under the new ownership. Failure to comply within 21 calendar days grants the supplier the right to pause fulfillment and slash or terminate without penalty. Every chair went still. Styluses stopped tapping. Even the HVAC system seemed to pause mid-cycle. The CEO, red in the face, already halfway through a bottle of flat Perrier, leaned forward. "Who changed ownership?" he asked, voice pinched. Trevor shrugged, then smirked. "It's probably just some fund. Passive investor nonsense. We'll reverse it." Martin didn't move. The lawyer didn't blink. Instead, she turned slowly toward Trevor and said, voice level, "Ask your son." Trevor blinked. "What, ask your son?" The words landed like lead bricks on a glass table, and in that moment Trevor's smirk shattered. He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. No joke. No quip, just that wide-eyed scramble of someone realizing the ice beneath their feet had already cracked 5 steps ago. The CEO turned to him, confusion morphing into suspicion. "Trevor, what does she mean?" Trevor looked at Martin, then at the lawyer, then finally at the door. Because that's when I stepped in. No announcement, no clearance badge, just me walking in like I owned the oxygen in that room. Folder in hand, neutral expression. Eyes straight on Trevor. The room didn't erupt, it inhaled. I reached the table, placed the folder gently beside Martin, and for the first time since the fake memo I looked Trevor directly in the eye. He didn't speak, which was perfect, because now it was time to turn the silence into a sentence. The folder made a soft thump as I set it down. No dramatic slam, no flourish, just precision, tan cover. Labeled simply, revised terms effective immediately. I didn't sit, I didn't need to. The weight of the room had already shifted, and everyone at that table, board members, execs, legal counsel, even the damn COO with his triple-click pen, was leaning ever so slightly toward me like they were bracing for either impact or instruction. Trevor, he looked like a kid caught shoplifting in a store his father owned. Still in that expensive blazer, but now his face had lost all its press release polish. Jaw tight, eyes darting between the folder and his father like maybe someone, anyone, was going to rescue him from the grown-up part of leadership. I opened the folder slowly, letting each page land like a bell toll. New pricing schedules, adjusted service protocols, a fulfillment calendar scrubbed clean of legacy obligations. And stapled to the front, a fresh contract cover sheet with one handwritten line at the bottom. All prior terms null. Reinstatement pending acceptance. I turned to the board. Support can resume within 48 hours, I said, voice steady, but only under these revised conditions. New rate structures, tightened KPIs, and a 10-day buffer window on all fulfillment to account for the. I let my gaze drift to Trevor, transitional turbulence caused by recent unauthorized attempts at renegotiation. Nobody argued. The COO cleared his throat, tried to pivot into diplomacy. This is sudden, I nodded. So was being locked out of a vendor portal after 12 years, but I adapted. The CFO leaned forward. You're the one who structured the original clause. I didn't break eye contact. I'm also the one who saw the fallout coming before your dashboard ever lit up. Then the lawyer slid another document across the table, this one already signed. Emergency resolution, she said. Trevor Halbert is suspended from all vendor-facing decision-making until further board review, effective immediately. The CEO didn't object, didn't speak. Just sat there, hands folded in front of him, jaw clenched so tight you could see the pulse twitching in his temple. Trevor opened his mouth, finally, ready to spit something, blame, denial, maybe another buzzword stew, but I raised a hand, just one finger. I took the fake memo of appreciation from my bag, one he'd smugly handed me weeks ago, unsigned and worthless. I set it gently next to the new contract, then looked him square in the eye. Trevor, I said, calm and clear. I believe you signed that memo. He froze, no one laughed, it wasn't funny, it was just true. I turned without waiting for the vote, for the thanks, for the whispered apologies that always come after someone remembers who you really were. Martin stood and followed me to the door, silent as ever. We didn't shake hands, we didn't need to. I pushed open the boardroom door and stepped into the hallway, past the ops desk, past the door where my nameplate had once been, past the memory of every late night I stayed to fix what boys like Trevor broke by daylight, and out through the glass-paneled lobby into sunlight that didn't feel like punishment anymore. Behind me, Trevor sat with his elbows on the table, surrounded by silence, stripped of power, staring down a future he thought he'd built with a smile and a title. But I wasn't coming back. I wasn't reclaiming a desk or asking for recognition. Because now, I was the COO, just not there. I was the one holding the stream, and he was finally drowning in it. Appreciate you sticking around, you legends of the break room. Subscribe for more chaos. Let's make your old managers spill their coffee in fear.